Welcome to the Power Dialog 2020 Climate Solutions for New York State. I see participants coming online here. Welcome. Feel free to type in the chat box where you're, what organization or school you're representing. We'll give some shout outs as we log on here. Okay, so we have Paul Smith College, SUNY Brockport, Cortland, UAlbany, University of Rochester, Iona, Marist, coming in fast and furious now. Siena College, Bard College, University of Buffalo. They're coming in so fast, I can't read them so quickly. Welcome, as I said, to the Power Dialog 2020 Climate Solutions for New York State. As people are logging in, I just want to give a shout out to everyone across the state. We've had about 35 colleges sign up for this, over a dozen high schools, many community organizations. We're happy to have you all here this evening for this important dialogue. And a few more people signing on. We're excited that so many of you could join us. Like as you sign in, if you want to type in the chat box where you're from, feel free, and we'll get our program started in just a few minutes. Some high schools, I see Poughkeepsie Day School has signed in, SUNY Purchase, University of Rochester. It's great to see so many parts of the state represented. Marist, Wells, New Paltz, lovely. Love seeing the high schools involved here too. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get our program started. I'm sure we'll have more people rolling in as we're getting underway here. But in the interest of time, I know we have a packed agenda, and we have some high quality panelists today to talk to us about what are some climate solutions we can do here in New York State. I want to introduce myself. My name is Mary Ellen Malia. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the University at Albany. I'm happy to be your host and moderator this evening. Before we get going, I do want to give a shout out. I may be the face of this event, but I had a lot of help, especially from my colleagues, Rachel Kornhauser at SUNY Oneonta, Ryan McPherson from University at Buffalo, and John Pomilio from Colgate University, and all the other Colgate team that is helping us on the webinar tonight. Thank you, thank you. So as we get going, we're dealing with a very important topic, climate change, something that I'm sure many of you are concerned about as you've signed up for this event. And we want to leave tonight with a positive message of what are solutions we can implement. How can we tackle this issue? We are one state of many that are participating in this event tonight. And so what we like to do is start the evening off with a message from one of the national organizers, Eben Goodstein from Bard College Center for Environmental Policy. And he's going to talk a little bit about the goals of this program and give us some food for thought in terms of what we might want to talk about tonight. I'm going to ask my colleagues at Colgate to transition to that video, so just bear with us for a moment as we move over to show you the video from Even.
Welcome to Solve Climate by 2030. Today, universities in almost all 50 U.S. states, Puerto Rico, D.C., and several other countries are hosting state and region-wide webinars focused on ambitious and feasible things that we can all do in our cities, our towns, and states in the coming year to really move the needle on climate change. Here is the most important idea to take home today. What you do locally will change the future. Fact, the U.S. state of Georgia is a top 10 solar state. The neighboring Sunshine State of Florida has very little solar power due to outdated laws and regulations. When we launched Solve Climate a year ago, we could never have imagined that today, entire countries and much of the world's economy would be shut down, with hundreds of thousands of people ill, thousands having passed away, and our health systems overwhelmed. I take that back. We could easily have imagined this. Our health experts and scientists warned us this was coming. After SARS and MERS, they told us this was coming, and yet we didn't take preventive action, we didn't prepare. COVID-19 has shown how fragile our health and economic systems are to extreme events. Our scientists have told us clearly that unchecked, climate change will turn our lives into an unending series of extreme events. Floods, droughts, rising sea levels, pests and disease, more extreme storms and hurricanes, all of this leaving hundreds of millions of people homeless and on the move. We can change this. We still have time to change that future. Last year, the world's top climate scientists told us that we have until 2030, 10 years now, to cut global warming pollution aggressively in order to stabilize the climate at the low end. That warning was the genesis for this national and international discussion today on how to solve climate by 2030. Solving climate in 10 years, that sounds challenging. And yet fixing the energy half of climate change by 2030 is looking more, not less likely than it was 4 years ago. The cost of solar and wind power, batteries, and electric vehicles have plummeted. In many cases, they are less expensive now than the fossil fuel power that causes global warming, and they are getting cheaper every day. Already, utility-scale wind and solar, big solar and wind farms that feed power into the grid, these technologies are crushing fossil fuels in much of the U.S. In Colorado, Idaho, and California, renewable bids are coming in at half the price that the cheapest fossil fuel plants can do. And this is where rooftop solar and battery systems are headed in the near future. On the vehicles front, all the major manufacturers see this coming. Mercedes-Benz announced last fall that they have designed their last gasoline-powered car. Going forward, every new model of theirs will be electric. Combining electric-powered vehicles with the impact of driverless technology, we could see a very rapid transition away from gasoline-based cars to EVs in the next decade. All this progress was the result of a major technology push by national governments. Starting in America in the 70s and then ramping up with the Danes, the British, the Japanese and Koreans, the Germans, and most recently the Chinese and Indians, government policies have brought these industries to scale. And now the market is taking over, and renewables, battery storage, and electric vehicles are on track to deliver power and transportation at prices unsubsidized that will lead to major disruptions of energy markets in the 2020s. Can we get there fast enough to solve climate? Well, this is where you come in. With plummeting prices for renewables and electric-powered transports, the pace of the clean energy revolution will no longer be determined by Washington, D.C. and other national governments. Instead, the core action is going to be in your city, at your electric utility, and in your state capital. The key to solving climate by 2030 will be clearing the path at the local level to rapid deployment of solar, wind, battery storage, and electric vehicles. We need to get rid of outmoded laws and regulations that are holding back the transition. Florida needs to take the lesson from Georgia. It's imperative that we have justice in this transition. We have to make sure that the millions of green jobs that are created are jobs for all, and that everyone has access to clean, affordable power and mobility. Today, in Nebraska and New Jersey, in Idaho and Alabama, in Bangladesh and Brazil, we're going to find out what are 3 ambitious but feasible things that we can do right at home to smooth the path for clean energy and to bring energy justice to our communities. Following the webinar, I hope you will join a group or class discussion about what you can do to make these solutions real. Then, what next? Well, this summer, young people in particular have a terrific opportunity to both support climate solutions and gain valuable job skills in a down economy. The most powerful thing you can do to solve climate by 2030 is to join the political campaign of a candidate who best represents your views on climate solutions. In doing that, you'll also learn how to communicate, you'll gain courage, and most importantly, be part of a creative, strong, powerful vision for the future. COVID-19 is giving us a stark lesson about what happens when we ignore warnings from science. Today, we'll see how 10 years can be enough time to drive the climate solutions that we need, and that the future will be what we make it. Thank you for the work you will do to solve climate.
I hope you enjoyed that message from Eben. A couple of takeaways, he gave us was talking about how we can move the needle within the time frame of the next 10 years. Also, I think his idea of action can happen at many levels. Some of you may be dismayed at what you perceive as a lack of action on climate change at the national level, but what we need to address climate change isn't just going to happen at the national level. It's going to happen at the state level, even down to the local level. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in New York State. I'm going to be assisted by a couple of very knowledgeable panelists on that. But I did want to, before we go to our panelists, I want to let all the attendees know if you have any questions you would like answered, just click on the Q&A function and type them in there, and we'll have some time later for Q&A. I sent out a primer to some of the organizers about a very important act that was passed last year in New York State called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. A lot of us just use the acronym CLCPA because it's a bit of a mouthful at once. But this was passed that sets some pretty aggressive climate goals, specifically an 85% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 from 1990 levels. It sets a goal for 100% carbon-free electricity. And it also has a lot of provisions around climate justice. There is a provision of a goal of 35% of clean energy investments to go to disadvantaged communities. This is going to be overseen, this plan is going to be developed and overseen by a Climate Action Council. They will be assisted by an Environmental Justice Advisory Group, a Climate Justice Working Group, and a Just Transition Working Group, and other advisory panels as needed, with the goal of having a plan ready by January 1st, 2024. So we may get into some of the aspects of that plan as we talk to our panelists, but I want to put everybody on kind of a basic footing about what was passed last year in our state that we'll be moving forward on. And I do want to move now to our panelists. So let me get my queuing up. Okay, now let's hear from some women who know a little bit more about this than I do, and I'm very grateful to have them here to talk a little bit about how we're working towards climate solutions in New York State. So I'm going to introduce them and ask them if they want to say a few words as an opening statement before we get to some of our questions we posed to them to think about. So I'm first going to introduce Maureen Leddy. and she is the director of the New York State Office of Climate Change. This is housed in the Department of Environmental Education. So many of us use the acronym DEC when we refer to that organization. But her office leads the development of programs and policies that mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and help New York communities and individuals adapt to the impact of the changing climate. Her office is organized in basically 3 sections. There's a mitigation and technical analysis area, adaptation and communications, and municipal support. Maureen has great experience. She was previously the project manager of the large-scale renewable energies program at NYSERDA. If you don't know what NYSERDA is, it stands for the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And there she also did program administration for something called the New York Generation Attribute Tracking System, which a lot of us call NIGATS. Many of us are familiar with that terminology, but I know we have some people on the webinar who may be new to this. So that's an important group that helps us quantify environmental, or identify environmental attributes to our clean energy. And Maureen's a great person to work in this because she's had program design and policy development for distributive scale solar in the New York Sun program, which is a NYSERDA program. She's worked in carbon finance, quantifying greenhouse gas reductions and potential energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And we'll give you her academic bona fides. Of course, I'm from an academic institution, so I'll give everyone their academic bona fides. She has her master's degree in natural resource management and environmental planning from Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. And she has a bachelor's in geography from SUNY Geneseo. So Maureen, I'd like to invite you, if you'd like to make a few opening words for the audience, go right ahead.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. I really appreciate it. So as Mary Ellen stated, I have an energy background, and recently I transitioned to the DEC for the purpose of leading the implementation of the CLCPA. DEC and NYSERDA are co-chairs of the Climate Action Council. They're the key implementing state agencies under the law, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be part of something truly amazing, which this climate legislation is going to do a ton for clean energy, for transportation, for all aspects of greenhouse gas emissions in the state of New York. And it's truly exciting to be at the forefront. You know, this was a pretty aggressive action by the state. It's nation leading, it's got global attention. So we're all in this together. Everybody in the state is going to pitch in and be part of this transition to a low carbon economy. And this is a great time to be a New Yorker. You know, we have a lot of things. We have the governor, I think, doing an awesome job with the pandemic response, and we're going to do an awesome job with our Climate Act implementation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maureen. Now I'm going to introduce to you our second panelist, Ann Reynolds, and Ann is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Clean Energy. We often call that ACE. A lot of acronyms we like to use, but if you're not familiar with ACE, they're a Albany-based nonprofit organization. They were formed in 2006 to promote clean and renewable energy and energy efficiency. Director Reynolds has over 20 years in the environmental field. She served at the DEC as Deputy Commissioner and as Assistant Commissioner for Policy and Planning. Before that, she was Director of the Air and Energy Program at Environmental Advocates of New York, and she successfully lobbied for the establishment of New York's Renewable Portfolio Standard and the creation of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We often call that RGGI, so maybe you've studied that. I know I've taught that in my classes before. And here's her academic bona fides. She has her master's in environmental study from Yale University and a BS in biology and environmental studies from Tufts University. She also has taught courses in the political science department at Union College, and she's taught on environment, energy, and climate change policy. And as I mentioned previously, the CLCPA is going to be initiated by a Climate Action Council, and Anne is one of the 22 members that have been appointed to that. So we're very honored to have you, Anne, here tonight. And would you like to say a few words to the attendees?
Sure. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. My main message, since I know I'm speaking to a group of college students and students in general, is that if you're interested in getting into practical approaches and making things happen when it comes to fighting climate change, that there's no better place to be doing that than New York State. As Maureen mentioned, the climate law that passed last year is super, super ambitious. New York is going for it, and it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. We're talking about changing how the economy is run and powered, but we have this really great, strong law. We have an excellent team in place. We have fabulous academic institutions, and we have the renewable energy industry ready to invest in New York State. So just 30 seconds on ACE, the organization where I work. We're a member organization, and our members are clean energy companies. So companies that build wind turbines, solar panels, hydropower, fuel cells, companies that do energy efficiency in commercial buildings and in homes, companies that are trying to promote electric vehicles and the transition to electric vehicles. So we are a combination organization of those companies and environmental groups. And the idea of ACE is that we will, if we can make the policies work for renewable energy companies and clean energy companies, then it'll bring that investment to New York, and we can make that transition. We have so much work to do, and it's so good to see people interested in it, but I just will repeat again that New York was on the forefront of a Green New Deal, and with this current health crisis, we need a Green New Deal more than ever. And we want clean energy to be part of the economic recovery for New York State. So thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Sorry for the day. I'm muting and unmuting myself. So bear with me as you have a novice moderator with Zoom here. Wonderful. So we're going to ask you a couple questions that we'd like you to give some insight on. And while I have you up, I'll have you take this one. What we talked about, I know in New York State we have the CLCPA, which is an overarching act. It involves many elements. So I'm wondering, is there a specific action embedded in there? I know I listed some of the targets of the act and some of how it's going to be governed, but I didn't get into some of the details of lots of measures. They talk about how we might achieve our goals for our climate neutrality. So is there something in there that you would particularly identify as the most ambitious, yet at the same time feasible, that we should be thinking about?
Sure. Well, I would say that the whole law is ambitious for sure, but I think it's feasible. You have to be an optimistic person to look at it and see that we can get there. But the part of it I wanted to focus on is renewable electricity. And I say that is there's issues in terms of greenhouse gas emissions from all the things you've heard about before, from agriculture, from industry, from buildings, from transportation. And there's a lot of different solutions that need to be put in place to address each of those sectors. But I want to suggest to you that it is electricity that is sort of the foundational issue of meeting those goals, because we need to make electricity from clean, carbon-free sources like wind and solar power. If we transition to all electric vehicles, but our electricity is still not clean, then we haven't achieved that goal. If we electrify all our heat and air conditioning to get away from natural gas use in the home, but our electricity isn't clean, then we haven't achieved those goals. So it's not the only thing you need to do, but a foundational thing you need to do is transition to renewable electricity. And to do that, you need to build wind and solar projects. It really comes down to a construction program. We have to find places and do environmental impact reviews and get permits and then construct wind and solar projects across the state of all sizes and types. And it would be best if they were geographically distributed. So I would suggest that you can't fight climate change unless you're supporting the construction of wind and solar projects. So I'll stop there, although I'm happy to talk more about it. I can talk about this all day, but I'll stop there.
You can talk about clean energy very well, yes. Thank you. Maureen, I'm gonna pass the question over to you. So what would you identify as a top action?
I definitely agree with Anne. The electricity system is a key part of the transition. But when I think about the ambitious but feasible, I always think about the 2030 goals. So we are trying to get to carbon neutrality by 2050, 85% reduction in our 1990 greenhouse gas emissions, with 15% managed through sequestration, carbon capture, and other methods. But we've got to get to 40% by 2030, and that's a lot sooner. We have, the law just went into effect at the beginning of this year and is on the council. The council has met once. That there's a lot of work that needs to get done. The scoping plan is on a fast track, which will lead to regulations that DEC and others will put in place, and those are set to go into effect in 2024. So now we have functionally 6 years for those regulations to have that big effect. So, but it's ambitious, but it's totally feasible because we're not starting from zero. We have a long history of doing great things in the state around renewable energy. We need to do a lot better. We have programs to advance electrification for vehicles, for energy efficiency. We have a good history there that we can build upon. And we're not stopping and waiting for 2024. We are continuing advancing programs that are correct, that are supportive, and we're going to keep on doing that. So, when the council does their good work, that interim target should really be top of mind, identifying strategies that are going to get us quick wins and have reductions that happen soon, that are the most cost effective, and also to look at that longer term. There's going to be trickier, more challenging reductions that we need to conquer at later dates. And the process does allow, it's not just one and done. The process reopens every 5 years for a revision to the scoping plan. Technology is going to change. 2050, can't even fathom what the world's going to be like then. But 2030, we have a pretty good feeling. That's, things are going to change, but we can imagine what the world will be like for good and bad. So that to me, I think, is ambitious, but absolutely feasible.
Great, thank you for that insight. Yes, and I'm glad you brought up that point that, it doesn't mean there's a lot of work going on continuously. We're not all waiting until that one date. So I appreciate that. And I did notice in the CLCPA, there were some goals for 6 gigawatts of solar and 9 gigawatts of wind, and some 3 gigawatts of storage. So we do have some goals to try to get that electrical system on renewables. So Maureen, while I have you here, I'm going to ask you a second question if you'd like to address. So in the state, we hear a lot of, I know something that I can speak of from UAlbany, I know a lot of our students have an interest in climate justice issues, and I think it's pretty common around many other colleges and universities. And I know within the CLCPA, the issue of disadvantaged communities and climate justice is discussed quite a bit. So in your opinion, what do you see as some of the pressing climate justice issues in our state, and how might we be addressing them?
Like you said, the law is responsive to climate justice concerns. The construction of this law and the process by which it came to be, there was a strong advocacy component to ensure that climate justice considerations are taken into account every step of the way. And there's a lot of stuff in the law to ensure that that was not just window dressing, that that's real and going to happen. The equitable distribution of the benefits of this transition is a big thing, and the jobs consideration. We're fundamentally changing the economy in major ways. There's going to be changes in the workforce. And that's important to recognize. That's going to have unequal impacts. Some people are going to benefit, some people are not. And there has to be a path forward to ensure that people are not left behind, because folks that are left behind tend to be in disadvantaged communities. They don't have the same representation or the same ability to advocate for their needs. So the law has this just transition working group, Marielle, that you referred to, that the council needs to consult with this working group to ensure that these workforce considerations are part and parcel of all the recommendations, how it's going to impact jobs. We have to put a report out. The NYSERDA is leading a job study on what are these new jobs that are going to be created, what are the impacts that are going to occur, and how are we going to address them. So that to me is a very key concern that is addressed in the law, and we have a requirement through the law to make sure that we protect that workforce.
Thank you, Maureen. Anne, would you like to address this issue as well?
Sure, thanks. I'm going to build on what Maureen said and then bring up something slightly different with climate justice. So I'm really happy to have been appointed to the Climate Action Council, and I think one of the jobs we will have to do is to make sure that the portions of the law that address disadvantaged communities are implemented and achieved, just as Maureen says. So I hope to be able to help with that and bring some attention to that, and winners and losers. And we're talking about major change. We're talking about moving away from different energy sources, closing some power plants, opening different ones. And so when there's winners and losers, we want to make sure that those benefits and those impacts are felt equitably and fairly across the population. But the other thing I wanted to mention is the operator of New York's grid coined a term called the tale of two grids for New York State. And I thought it was something worth mentioning, that already now upstate, between hydropower operated by the state of New York and wind power and nuclear, the upstate grid is very clean. Now there's strong opinions in opposition to nuclear, but not for carbon reasons. And so there's very low carbon emissions from the upstate electricity grid. The same is not true for downstate in New York City. There's still a lot of polluting power plants in neighborhoods where people live, where people are breathing. And it's part of our challenge is to replace that power with clean power. And that's why two things are really important, because there's not enough room in New York City to build there's some room, but not enough room to build extensive solar farms and land-based wind. But that's why we need offshore wind, so we can have power close to the city and replace some of those oil and natural gas plants. And that's why we need major investments in transmission, so we can have a stronger transmission system that connects our whole state, so we can move that clean power upstate, downstate, so we all get the benefit of clean air. And to me, that's an important climate justice issue that I wanted to mention too.
Thank you. I apologize, everyone. I see my visual. The changing light outside is making my my video here a little darker. So apologies to all attendees, but it's not important that you see me. It's important that you see our panelists and hear their great wisdom. I also did want to apologize. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties with Assemblymember Patricia Fahy, so she was not able to join us tonight. But I really appreciate Maureen and Anne's insight on these issues. I have a question here from the crowd, so maybe while I have you up here, Anne, have you heard any talk about a post-COVID economic recovery bill that would address sort of green issues, or making any posts when we go to restart the economy, making it greener?
Not yet. Not yet, but I think that I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if that happens. I'll put it that way. I will say that last year's climate law was a great success. But from the renewable energy industry point of view, we thought we needed another law passed, which would reform the permitting process. Because in New York, it took between 5 and 10 years to get a large wind or solar project built. And we worked hard for that in coalition with a lot of environmental groups. It was introduced as part of the budget at a time when the world was a different place, right, before this health crisis. And even amidst coronavirus, we lobbied to have that pass in the state's budget, and it did last week. So the renewable, it's called the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, passed just last week, that I see as the companion to the climate law. And in our advocacy, we did talk about how if we could get these projects under construction and continue to move ahead with this transition, it's a job creator, and it should be part of the economic recovery. But I fear that right now the laser focused on making it through the worst of this crisis. But I would predict that on the other side there will be some discussion about economic recovery. One other thing to mention is that a bond act was passed, and this will go to a referendum to voters on election day in November. And again, you would have thought that in this crisis, maybe something like that wouldn't make it through, but I think people saw the bond act as a way to reinvest in climate resiliency, in infrastructure that helps protect the environment and helps protect people. So I think in the coming months, people will be hearing more about that, and it should be on the ballot in November. And that is an investment in New York's future that could help with the economic recovery too.
Thank you. Maureen, would you like to add?
Much like Anne, I haven't heard anything about a specific economic stimulus. I know we are thinking a lot about it at the agency level on what we can do, what programs, what ideas do we have, how can we put those forward? But, you know, there is nothing, you know, known at this time. I think we're not at that point yet, right?
Yeah, and again, I do want to give a nod once more to Assemblymember Fahy. I'm sure she would have some great insight on this. She's been a great champion for environmental causes and was one of the co-sponsors of the CLCPA. So, but it's an excellent question moving forward. I think we can do one more question. We do want to show a video that was prepared by Bard College students that is a great way to transition us into what students can do. But before we do that, let's talk about the issue of adaptation versus mitigation. So Maureen, do you think adaptation efforts could distract us from mitigation work?
No, you know, I don't think so. I don't think it's an either or question. There are folks that are incredibly passionate about mitigation and finding solutions, and there's folks that are incredibly passionate about adaptation and resiliency. And they work together and they have a common purpose. You know, we can't not move for adaptation and resiliency. There's certain things that are going to happen. We've seen it around the state with the flooding in Lake Ontario, right? Like, there are changes. This managed retreat is a big thing now that people are discussing. Those are not bad things to do, and those are things that we should do. And as Anne mentioned, the Restore Mother Nature Bond Act has a lot of provisions in there for doing better work around streams so that when there's high storm events, there's not flooding. You know, we're trying to make connectivity, and that has habitat benefits as well. There's lots of great positives to adaptation and resiliency work. So no, I don't think it's a distraction. I think they're kind of two separate disciplines that work together. And you know, there is a team that cares a lot about mitigation, and that's where they put their time and energy. And there's a team that works on adaptation, and we all work together.
Thank you. And Anne, would you like to chime in on this?
Yeah, I can't resist. I totally agree with everything Maureen said, but I would like to say that 20 years ago, I would have answered that question differently. And I was one of those passionate people that would fight with people who were focused on adaptation and think that means we've given up. We have to focus on reducing emissions and avoiding climate change and not give up. But that was a while back, and now here we are. Climate change is advancing. It's equally important to talk about adaptation. I personally, it gets me down. So I like to focus on efforts to transform the energy system and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But I'm glad that there's also those people that are thinking about, now that climate change is underway, how do we make ourselves safer and better prepared?
Great, thank you for that insight. So we'll get back to some more questions, but before we do that, we do want to focus a little bit on what students can do and what role they can play. So as a way to introduce this concept, we were grateful to receive a video that was prepared by students at Bard College that talked a lot about the different efforts that they're doing. So what I'd like to do now is ask my Colgate team to cue up that video and give us a moment when we transition to it. And we can all watch that video, and then we'll come back and have a conversation with our panelists about student action.
My name is Karen Canfield. I am a senior here at Bard. I started the Bard Eco Community my sophomore year, which is a club on campus focused on environmentalism. Before that, there was only the Citizens Climate Lobby student chapter, and it wasn't getting a lot of engagement because students weren't politically motivated to go out and lobby all the time. So I wanted to bring a way for students to activate sustainability and make it more accessible and more engaging and a lot more fun, to be honest. Started working for the Office of Sustainability, and Lori, the manager, already had a program called Bard E's, which is Bard E to the 3, Environment, Equity, and Economy. And the idea was that if you really want to practice sustainably, you need to practice all 3 of those hand in hand. So I did a training session, and I made this whole curriculum of like how to recycle, what our water system is, what our food system is, why we compost, how all of the compost on campus is a full circle program. Our food waste goes to our farm, which makes more food for our students, which is so cool. And the idea was when you start learning about the systems you're already a part of that you don't know, and you teach your peers about it, they start to realize, and you realize how you're actually making so many actions and you don't even know it. When you're in the dining hall and you choose to compost, you might not realize that that compost will be the food you eat next semester. But when we start teaching students that, and teaching students about how all of the water on campus comes from the Saltkill River, which is also right here on campus, it's so much easier to realize like the cause and effect of every student's action and reaction on campus. Bard Eco Community came back in the fall, and the global climate strike was happening at the end of September. So the club decided we wanted to host a strike here on campus. We wanted to make sure that the strike would have serious, real impact, because a lot of people, you know, you can be anxious about climate change and you could want to do something, but if you don't know how to take real physical action, you might not feel like you're doing anything, even if calling a politician is doing something. So we said, what's a way that we can make people feel like they're making real change? And that's when we came to the Sustainable Development Goals Accord, and we decided to petition on campus to have that be a part of the climate strike we were hosting, and that awesomely passed. Bard also declared a climate emergency and kind of re-added their goals of becoming climate neutral. And so that's a lot of what my work has been engaged in. So now a lot of what we do with a lot of other clubs. We do with a lot of community groups. The Red Hook Community Center, we've had repair cafes there that are now having SDGs all over the place, which is really cool. We've hosted events with Code Red, which is providing menstrual products for free on campus, and we did make your own reusable menstrual pads and a Diva Cup giveaway. My club has created a club sustainability kit, so any club can check out up to 150 sets of utensils and dishware. to host a banquet or any type of event with food and basically cut out all of the waste of that. We kind of work with a lot of other groups to help our community in general, but also like target accessibility to sustainability, because that's what's so difficult. It's really easy if you have money and time to make your life more sustainable, but you can't expect people who might not have excess of either of those things to go out and make the decision to purchase a reusable or to wash it every time they come home and bring it the next day. So to make things more accessible to people is kind of the most we can do to help our community have more sustainable lifestyles. You're not going to fill a need the community has unless you really talk to the community and understand what they need from you. So we wouldn't have the Club Susty Kit if clubs didn't come asking for that type of a thing. Same with the Wellness Food Pantry. On top of that, you know, take pride in every little action you do, because it's those like small things that will motivate you to continue to want to take more action and to have those actions be bigger and bigger as you continue. And also, like, don't let other people get in your head about it. Like, really, if you have something in mind that you want to complete, or if you think that there's a real need in your community, stay focused on that, and you will be able to complete it. I don't see climate work as like the forefront of my future of work, but I think as the SDGs really taught me and have been teaching the campus, no matter what you study, no matter what you go on to do, there's a sustainable path to doing that thing. And that's what I really want to work towards, is if I'm going to be a museum educator someday, I want to make sure that the museum I'm helping to curate is talking about all voices equally and is, you know, privileging stories that need to be told more than ones that have been told over and over again. And that's a more sustainable path.
Is a beautiful piece they put together, and Carrie Ann should be very proud of the work she does there. She gave us a lot of ideas. There are a lot of different ways that students can get involved, from small individual actions like composting or saving water to more politically advocacy around strikes and petitions. And I like how she worked with the community and collaborated and talked to the community and addressed issues of accessibility. She also gave us a couple new food for thought that some people in our line of work are familiar with. I have my global goal pin. There's 17 sustainable development goals the UN has developed for the world to achieve by 2030. And I know she mentioned them. A lot of us in the sustainability world in higher ed are aligning our actions around those goals. And I noticed by her, over her shoulder was a poster for Drawdown, Project Drawdown. Drawdown is a book that looks at a lot of measures around climate mitigation and assesses them for their effectiveness. So if you're not familiar with that book, I would recommend you check it out and take a look at that, and also Google the global goals and learn a little bit more about them. But let's digest a little bit about what some of the examples and some of the ways that Anne, you, and Maureen see that students can get involved. Because we talk a lot about policy, and it may seem like a very abstract issue for a lot of students. They don't feel like it's something that they're doing. So how can they be involved? So Anne, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So one thing I'd like to mention is that there's a lot of opposition to wind and solar projects around New York State. You can do a Google search about media coverage, and there tends to be a lot of positive support for renewable energy in communities, but there often is a vocal minority of people who don't want a project to be built for one reason or another. And I can talk about the reasons why if you'd like. But wherever you are in New York State, there are probably some proposed wind and solar projects, and those are projects that could use your help in terms of support. Just verbal support, a letter of support, going to a town meeting. It is human nature that the people who tend to go to town meetings about proposed projects are those that oppose them. And so there's very often no proponents of a wind and solar project that speak up at town meetings or planning board meetings and that type of thing. The other thing is where I thought that that video made a great point about wherever you are, you can make a difference. And I would like to connect that to this clean energy transition. Colleges could make pledges to buy all renewable energy or to construct renewable energy on campus. And that will be part of what helps New York get to its goal. So if you're a college student, you can ask your college to buy renewable energy or build renewable energy. Once you graduate, the biggest, one of the biggest drivers of wind and solar project across the company are corporate purchases by Google, by Facebook, by Amazon. They've all made commitments to buy renewable energy, which allows these projects to get financed and built. And they've done it because probably their employees and their customers demand it. They want to work for a place. Like if you're a programmer, you're not in the renewable energy industry, but you'd like to work for a place that you think is being responsible about climate change. So demanding that transition from your colleges, your schools, your churches, your places of business, the community centers, the JCC, they can all help create this market demand for renewable energy, and they'll do that if people ask them to.
Thank you, Anne. And Maureen, what words of wisdom do you have that you would encourage students to actions to take, to get?
I think a lot that how we communicate what it is we're trying to do with this is incredibly important. It's a huge challenge. And we, at this forum right now, we're all like-minded people. We all agree with each other. We all think this is the right thing to do. We probably all make choices that align with greenhouse gas reductions. We forego things because of the climate impact. But that message doesn't resonate with everybody. And we need to get everybody on board to have this be successful. And I'm not a marketing person, but I'm very impressed sometimes with how marketing people get people to do things, buy things they don't need, and do things they don't necessarily want to do. We need to steal from that playbook to some degree, to get people to see that, get away from the doom and gloom and the scary and start to think about the positive. How do we turn this into a desirable lifestyle that people want to do? We're not asking them to self-sacrifice so much as we're saying, join us in this bright new future. And this is something I think students are to have to talk to the people who don't agree with you to understand why, so that you can tailor that message in a way that's going to resonate with that audience. And I think that's something that students have a real, you're on a diverse campus and there's all sorts of different opinions out there. Try to talk to people who don't agree with you, that are going to argue with you, but not to convince them that they're right or you're right, but just to understand why don't you want to do this? And if we can get down to those reasons, we might have a chance of changing behavior if we understand why is there the resistance. So that to me is something I think a lot about in terms of how we're going to drive the individual changes that are necessary, that we can create a lot of animosity towards this movement if it seemed like people are put upon to do things they don't want to do or being forced to have something taken away from them that they hold precious. So we don't want to go there. We want to go and keep it positive, keep it future looking to a bright new future where everybody's better off. Everybody has better health. It's just, so that's a challenge that I think students are poised to really do a great job with, and to be that kind of messenger in a different kind of.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge that we know we're getting a lot of questions, a lot of great questions coming in that we probably won't be able to answer given our time frame, but we will do our best to log in these questions and continue this conversation, because we're hoping that this isn't just a one-time thing. It's kind of the conversations that you can continue in your communities, and perhaps we can get back together again as a larger group and have these. I do also want to apologize. I was informed that Carrie Ann uses they, them pronouns. So Carrie Ann, I'm sorry I used incorrect pronouns when I was referring to you earlier. Apologies. And again, kudos to the great work you're doing there. But something I'd like to kind of ask Anne and Maureen in our remaining time here as well you talk about individual actions. I know a lot of our students are getting involved with grassroots organizations. Some are in Sunrise, some are joining Extinction Rebellion and other kinds of groups, 350.org. So what role do you see them playing? Sorry, I didn't cue you. Maureen, you can go ahead first.
Anne was ready. She's jumping in. We see, you know, the Climate Act came from a strong base of advocacy, and that's not over just because the law passed. You know, there is a real need to have this kind of stakeholder input from advocacy groups, from industry groups, from every player that is part of this process to help inform what the council is being put in front of them to consider putting in that scoping plan. To build the most broad-based support for what it is we want to do, we need to have all of that input part of the process. So we are really thinking very much about how we design an inclusive stakeholder process that brings in, you know, a lot of, you know, how we share information, how we receive feedback, how we incorporate that feedback. You know, that's another way beyond advocacy groups. Individual students can come and, you know, learn about the process, see how we're doing, you know, provide their point of view. Not to say that everybody's opinion can be accommodated, but you need to get all of that different information to ensure that you're going to get the best buy-in, you're going to get the best results from the end product.
Thank you, Maureen. And Anne, I know you will have definitely insight on this, given your experience as well. So please tell us what you would say.
I think Maureen covered it, but I would just say yes. Join a group. Even if you're not someone who thinks of yourself as interested in politics, occasionally, maybe once a year, wade into politics and support some clean energy legislation that might be pending in your town or your county or in Washington, D.C. or in Albany, because it's an important part of the process. So the best would be a combination of that personal action that's getting you or your college or someone to try to build solar panels, and once in a while supporting something that the advocacy groups are trying to do at the legal level.
Yes, I agree. I would say, if I'm allowed to add a comment as a moderator from our experience working on campus, it's such a multi-level range of things students can do. It is of course your own individual actions, which is something we tended to focus on very heavily back a dozen years ago when I started this, but we've come to realize the systemic change we need really involves more collective action, and everyone can play a role in that. Even if you don't feel like you're politically motivated, you can still vote. Every election can matter in terms of addressing climate change, because it can be addressed at every level. And of course, you can always contact your elected officials, and you can, if you feel more motivated, join in strikes, letters to the editor, more politically lobbying kind of efforts with some of the groups, such as environmental advocates. So I know we're coming to the end of our time, and I really am excited in some ways to see all the questions, and sad in others that we can't address them all, but it definitely shows there is a real hunger to have these conversations and to learn more about what's feasible, which I think will only assist the efforts moving forward of the state. We are not bystanders in this. We should be participants and not expect 22 people to figure this all out, right? We need to give our input along the way. But I do want to allow Anne and Maureen, if you have any final statements or last messages you'd like to say before we close out the hour. Anne, I have you up on the screen, so why don't you go first?
Sure, just 1 minute. I saw in the chat there are a lot of questions about energy efficiency, and I didn't speak about that much. But just to put that in perspective, the law also has really aggressive efficiency goals, 185 trillion BTU of savings. That's also ambitious. We could have spent the whole call talking about that. those are real jobs in New York. There's 126,000 New Yorkers that work in energy efficiency. And these are people that are do heating and cooling and construction and sell energy efficient appliances and do insulation. And most of them right now are out of work because none of that work can happen if it's indoors. So I mention this for two reasons. It's absolutely an equal part of the puzzle that will build a solution, as renewable energy efficiency is equally as important as renewables. And it's also an industry sector that's hurting right now. And if after we, God willing, make it through this health crisis, New York doubles down in investments in energy efficiency, not only can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we can put people back to work. So I wanted to end on that note. Thank you so much.
Nice, very nice. Maureen.
I'll echo Anne. I mean, there's really some great questions. If we had another 2 hours, I think we could just keep on going answering all these questions. It's very inspiring to have a community of students so engaged with coming up with really great questions, really well-informed questions. I think it's great, and we should definitely keep the dialogue going.
I echo that. I mean, I wish we could keep going. But we have reached the end of our time. We're actually a minute over, but I do thank so much Maureen and Anne for your participation and your contributions. And I thank everyone who signed up for this webinar. And we got some great questions. And looking forward, as I mentioned, I've been doing this long enough to remember we had a Power Dialog 4 years ago. Some of us worked on that, and at the time we were talking about the Clean Power Plan. Fast forward 4 years, we're doing it again. We're hoping we can do it a little more often than wait another 4 years. Certainly, we'll take a look at all the things that people are asking about, because now that we have the CLCPA, it's giving us a structure and we can really begin to dig down and figure out the specific actions we can take to make those goals. So once again, I thank everyone for joining us, and especially our panelists. I apologize for my poor lighting. I live in a farmhouse and I must have just awful light in here. I even have a light on. I will sign off on behalf of the organizers of the Power Dialog 2020, and we hope to continue the conversation. Thank you.